we were asking her to, like, okay, don't put so much weight on your actual transformational experiential encounter with the living Christ. We need you to put it more into, like, did you say these words to God in order to get this transaction to be sealed? Do you see how dangerous that is? When we think about hearing from God and God speaking to us, and we think of the passage in John 10 where Jesus is talking about being the good shepherd and calling his sheep by name, and the sheep recognize his voice. And the sheep also are not fooled by the voice of the thief. Like, they can distinguish between the enemy and the good shepherd. It's a pretty compelling passage. As you read further down into the passage, though, Jesus starts talking about that he has sheep that are not of this fold. So he's explaining, my sheep hear my voice. They recognize my voice. I call them by name. And in a way, we can make that sound like, well, that's our group. That's our group is the one that can hear. We're the ones that know Jesus and that Jesus is speaking to. But in this passage, he says, even as the Father knows me, this is John 10:15, and I also know the Father, I am giving you my very own life and laying it down on behalf of the sheep. Then he says, and I have other sheep beside these that are not of this fold. I must bring and impel those also, and they will listen to my voice and heed my call. So there will be one flock under one shepherd. And it's referring back to Ezekiel, actually, the one flock and the one shepherd. So what does that mean? What does that mean? That Jesus is explaining to the disciples and the Jewish people, I have sheep that are not of this fold. Well, this is John 10, and so we've already seen in John 5 that he's talking to Samaritans, and he's talking to the Syrophoenician, and he's talking to the Gentiles. So certainly he means that it's not just Israel or Jewish people or, religious people. It's like the whole spectrum that he has other sheep that are not of this fold. There's other folds, but the goal is to bring them all together under one flock and one shepherd. So what does that mean to us as we're out in the world and we're talking about Christ and we're sharing our faith? Remember, sharing your faith is talking to a person who believes something false about themselves or God or the future because they don't have hope. Faith is the substance of the things we hope for, the evidence of things we don't see yet. So when we're sharing our faith, it's not about converting people to our way of thinking about God. It's about saying to them, in the situation that you find yourself in, there's hope. There's hope because God speaks to you in the same way that he would speak to me, which means that then sharing my faith with that person is taking my faith in God's capacity to speak and to bear witness to people and sharing that experiential relationship with them. How? By doing it with them. By being with them. I love the quote that Jesus doesn't fix people, he heals people, and that our job is to hold people while Jesus heals them. So to be a witness, to bear witness is, Jesus has healed me, you're not well, you're not whole, can I embrace you, hold you, while Jesus heals you? And what does that process look like? So I was raised very much in, you need to go out and share your faith and win people to Christ, sort of an onward Christian soldiers marching us to war kind of thinking. And evangelism was much more of apologetics and polemics of like attacking what's false in a transactional argument and getting the person to switch to your intellectual position. And I never really liked it. I always wanted to talk to people about Christ and my faith, but I was never good at arguing with them. I always felt uncomfortable, and a lot of my ego would get involved. Like, I got to win this argument. I got to prove that I can present the point better than they can and defeat their argument. And I never liked it. I wasn't good at it, but I felt guilty because I, wasn't doing it. So the more I read the scriptures and what Jesus is doing with people is he's walking them into wholeness. And he's promising to do it across different ethnicities, as we see in the whole Bible, and sheep of another fold. So that means that if I'm with another person who maybe they don't have any context of an American Western Christian perspective on God, they're completely different, they're Muslim or they're Hindu or whatever, do I have to figure out a special way to talk to a Hindu person or a special way to talk to a Buddhist person? Or is the Good Shepherd there with them, calling to them in a voice that they would recognize? And maybe that they hear the voice, they don't recognize it for whatever reason because they're deceived or they don't know who that is, so that we can bear witness to that. So we have lots of examples of that in our life. We see it in Scripture, but in our own life. And one that has been on my mind lately is when we were kind of first starting out, Donna and I, and we been through the police department and been through seminary, and we were preparing to go overseas into the Muslim world. The church we were in challenged us to start an international outreach. It is in the Washington, D.C. area. And so I didn't want to, we have a huge international community, obviously, in that city. I didn't want to go out and argue with people, though. I was really asking the Lord, can you show me how to communicate to people the way Jesus would? I don't want to try and study up on Buddhism and argue with it, because there were in the low-income apartment complexes around us was a huge Lao, Thai, Vietnamese population, really large, which is predominantly Buddhist. So because I had been a police officer in the area, I knew the housing projects. I knew a lot of the people that worked in those projects, some of the people that lived in them. And so we started going to visit people in this one housing project. And in the Lao community, in the Asian community, there's typically a lead person. And it's usually the most elderly person. So I thought, well, that's their structure. Let's go inside their structure. Don't try and build our own structure. Let's find the elderly person in the community and talk to that person and see if the kingdom, would go down through that. So in the neighborhood that we were going around and talking to people, the young Laotian men would say, yeah, the leader in our community is this woman. They called her grandmother, or Metu was their term for her grandmother. And she really decides everything that we do in this neighborhood, ultimately. And she's very wealthy, because the scuttlebutt was that she had smuggled all this gold out of somewhere in Asia. So they were super protective of her. They didn't want it getting around in other communities that there was all this gold in this apartment. I don't know if that was true or not. So eventually they took us to meet her. So we go into this, low-income building in this not very nice neighborhood, all the way up to the top floor. And she lives by herself in this apartment. But on the floor below her were all these young, kind of Asian gang guys that guarded her floor. So we had to work through that community. We go to meet with her. Very gracious, ancient lady, really tiny, and started meeting with her and talking with her. And we had to have a translator with us because she didn't speak English. So we're talking to her through a translator, and she has the Buddhist altar shelf in her apartment there. And so I was asking her, how do you understand Buddha and this kind of thing? And it's interesting. So in the Buddhist culture, Islamic culture is shame, honor. Our culture is guilt and innocence. The Buddhist culture is fear and power, which are all represented in the creation story. And so she was very much into, not like she loved Buddha because, she had some kind of relationship, or it was just simply protection. Who protects us? Who protects us from the evil spirits? And so giving sacrifice to this altar shelf to Buddha, she believed protected her from all the evil. And she lived in a horrible neighborhood. And so it protected her from the bad people in the neighborhood. And so when I was talking to her about Jesus, I kept, Jesus is from God and that way. And she kept stopping me going, what can Jesus do? Like, what does he do? Which is funny for me as a Westerner, as like, what do you mean, what can he do? I'm telling you, that he's the way to heaven and Jesus forgives us of our sin. She's no, what can he do right now in this neighborhood? Like, I don't need to know all this other abstract stuff. What can he do to help me and be with me in this neighborhood that we live in and protect my family? And I was like, I don't know how to tell you that. And she said, well, when I see Jesus do something like that, then I would know that he is greater than Buddha and greater than any of the ancestors that we pray to. And so we left like, wow, I don't know what to do there. And so we just started praying for her that somehow Jesus would speak to her. When we look at this passage, it's like Jesus is saying, I have sheep in other folds. You guys aren't the only ones that have this. It's across the world. It's across all cultures. So we started praying for her and for like, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And then we made contact with some of the guys that, guard her building. And they said she wanted to meet with us. So we go to meet with her and go into her apartment. And when we're going up into the building, the lock on her door had been broken. So clearly someone had broken into her apartment. How they did it through all the people, I don't know. But so we were sitting with her and she's all like worked up and not afraid, but like excited. And so through the translator, she tells us that she was sitting in her apartment one night and some men started pounding on the door of her building, of her apartment, and they kicked the door in. It broke into her place. And she had gold on the coffee table that she was like looking at for some reason, like a large amount of gold. And they kick in the door and they come in because of the rumor that she has all this gold in her apartment. And they're from a rival gang. And they're ransacking her place and the gold is all right on the table in front of her. And she's tiny little lady. She's sitting there and she says, okay, now Jesus, if you're real, show me how you protect. And these guys ransack her whole apartment and they never touch the gold that's laying right on the table in front of her. It's like they don't even see it. And then they finally leave. And she says right then, she says, okay, I now know that Jesus is real. She tells us that experience. And she said, I'm ready to follow Jesus. Like that was it. Well, it was strange because it was kind of hard for us just to accept that. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's it? Like, you're just going to believe in Jesus now? And she said, yes, that's it. We were asking for Jesus to demonstrate who he really is. He did. He protected me in this situation. It's a miracle. And I'm ready to follow Jesus. 2 weeks. So we're processing that and we're thinking about like, sadly, like, is she a real believer? Does she understand what happened? Does she know Jesus? 2 weeks later, she's walking home. There's these paved pathways between their apartment complex and the shopping center. And she's walking home and she has a gold watch and it somehow comes off her arm and she drops it. She gets all the way to her place. Later that evening, she thinks, oh my gosh, where's my watch? She can't remember what happened to it. And so she prays and she says, Jesus, I know that you're with me. You protected me. Can you protect my watch? Because it's part of, my family when I had to leave Laos. Can you protect it and help me find it through the night? So that her watch, as far as she knows, is laying on this path between all these low-income housing projects and the shopping center. And she just waited. She has complete trust that Jesus can do this. And she says she went to sleep in peace. She gets up the next day with some of the young guys. They walk with her back to the shopping center and her watch is laying right in the middle of the path. And she puts it on and she said, I knew Jesus would do this. I know this is what he does. He's like a guardian, a protector. And she said, he's like a shepherd. So then when we got to show her this passage in John 10 in a Lao Bible, she said, yes, this is true. This is him. So we invite her to come to church, which she had never done before. And when she came to church, she brought 40 people with her. Like, she basically told her community, we're going to this church because Jesus is real, and we're going to this church, and we're all going to go there, and we're all going to give our lives to Jesus. So if you can imagine this, on a Sunday, she comes in with all these loud people just into the service, very disruptive and disorderly. And she tells the pastor through the translator that she wants that all of these people that she's brought with her are now believers in Jesus, and she wants them to get baptized. How she knew about that, I don't know if the translator told her that, but she wanted them all to get baptized and be a part of the church. So the church process was to interview them and ask them, how did you come to know Jesus? So she was first, how did you come to know Jesus? And she said, oh, because, they broke into my apartment and Jesus protected us, and I lost my watch and Jesus protected us, and I found my watch, and so I know he's true, and I want to follow him. The elders said, yeah, but when did you ask Jesus into your heart? Like, when did you pray the sinner's prayer? She said, I don't know what that is. And they're like, but I mean, where's the point where you said that you're a sinner? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm telling you, I know Jesus is real because I've experienced him in my apartment and in my neighborhood, and I know he's real, and I want to give my life to him. And once I told all the people in my community about Jesus, they're also ready to follow Jesus and to, give their lives to him. And it was really difficult for the church to receive it because we have such a narrow way that we validate what a person believes. So the irony was, we were asking her to, okay, don't put so much weight on your actual transformational experiential encounter with the living Christ. We need you to put it more into did you say these words to God in order to get this transaction to be sealed? Do you see how dangerous that is? How much that moves away from abiding and knowing the risen Christ to just assenting to a doctrinal treatise, or just signing off on a sheet of paper that says, I believe these words. Because then what you have is a kind of, it's not really a relationship with Jesus. It's a religion that follows rules, and it loses the power and the veracity of an actual relationship with Christ. So that when we go out to bear witness to Jesus, we're not talking about, this is the power of the risen Christ in your life on Monday in the real world. We're presenting an idea, an abstract idea of a God who cares about these words said in these ways. And so we lose our power to bring transformation to the world, and we just switch to information. So I think as we read scripture, and as we're reading the words of Christ, and we're reading through all the passages about these interactions, experiential interactions with Christ, that's where transformation lies. And so we can't give away what we don't have. We need to be abiding in Christ. We need to be believing what he believes about us. We need to be experiencing Jesus on a pretty regular basis in our everyday life, so that when we go to hold people who are hurting, we're doing it because we ourselves have experienced it, and we're sharing a faith that's vital to us because we live it. And in this way, we become bold and courageous in bringing the good news that the King is here, the kingdom is alive, and the good news is real. And that's the joy that we have to bring to this broken world.